Well, welcome to our final module, Module 7. We're going to talk about 3 different parts in this module, and it's basically going to be a review of what you can do for English language learners. We hope you've enjoyed a lot through the modules so far, and this last module will help to wrap us up. So Part 1, the OCR. Here we're talking about the requirements that have been placed upon us on these ELL programs for our local agencies, which are the school districts, and also at the school level, which also, of course, includes administrators and teachers and counselors and anyone that interacts with a student who's a part of the ESOL program, or that's an English language learner. Let's take a little pretest on the OCR to see what you know about it. So, number 1, what does OCR stand for? The correct answer, the Office for Civil Rights. The last slide was a little tricky. It said Office of Civil Rights, but it's actually the Office for Civil Rights. Number 2, the OCR was established due to what important act from 1964? You got it. The Civil Rights Act. Number 3, what's the main purpose of the OCR? To prohibit discrimination? To strike fear in the minds of educators? Or to conduct witch hunts to find non-compliance? Well, hopefully you chose that the answer is A. Okay, our next few questions. Number 4, true or false? A note about a child's discipline issues does not need to be translated. This, of course, is false. Anything we communicate with an English-speaking parent, we also want to communicate with a non-English-speaking parent in the same way. And obviously we know that it might take a little bit longer to get the communication home, but we want to make sure that it happens so the parents can understand what's happening in the schools. Number 5, true or false? The Home Language Survey is not required by federal law for English-speaking children that enroll in our school district. This is also false. The Home Language Survey is completed by every single parent who enrolls a child in our school district, and it's also a federally required document to make sure that every district in the United States knows what the language background of a child is and how that might affect the students. It's determined by the testing that happens later. But that Home Language Survey is very important for every single student to have in their file. Number 6, true or false? Parents must request translation and interpretation services if they need them. You can see this as a bit of true and false, because it is true that parents need to tell us if there's a different language in the house that they would like to be called in or send home messages in. But it's false that in every given situation they should have to come in and say, I need this translated, or I didn't understand what that phone call meant. Because the schools have already gotten track of it based on our information system, and we as a school are required now to send the information home to the parent anytime that those services are needed. So our final slide of pretest questions is number 7, true or false? Using the same textbooks, assignments, and practices with ESL students as with other students is an equal education. Again, false. And here, like we've talked about before, an identical education is not an equal education. We need to do things to make sure that we're taking care of our students, meeting them at the levels that they're at to bring them up to the levels where they need to be. Number 8, which programs and organizations are ESL students barred from due to their country of origin or their English proficiency level? And I hope again you answered none of them, because every child is given the access to be a part of any club or organization or school program, just like any other student is if they meet the requirements. And oftentimes we might need to take their English language proficiency into consideration as we understand what those requirements are and if they're fair or not. Because again, identical is not equal. Number 9, which of this following information here can be requested and which of it is required by a school or a sport or an organization to collect at the school level? Social Security number? Actually, no. It can be requested, but it can never be required, and the people have to tell why it's being requested and what it'll be used for. What about proof of residency or immigration papers? Proof of residency in our district, yes. Immigration papers, no. We can't even request this, and of course it would be breaking the law for us to ask them if they're breaking the law. Third one, country of origin. We can ask this. That's part of our Title III immigrant status. So that's totally fine in order to request that. What about Immigration status. Again, definitely not. We don't ask about those things because it's been determined that the schools are here to educate children, not to conduct witch hunts or various things to take care of the parents for what choices they've made. We're here to educate students. What about finding out the time they've been in the U.S.? That, of course, is a great question for us to request because it helps us to know how long a student's been learning English and how long it might take them to continue until they get to the level of proficiency. Okay, let's spend a little bit of time kind of giving a brief overview of the Office for Civil Rights. And by first off starting, what is it? Well, it's a federal civil rights enforcement agency that began after the Civil Rights legislation of '64, and its mission is to ensure the equal access to education and to promote the educational excellence through vigorous enforcement of civil rights. The OCR can conduct compliance reviews in a district if they so choose. They can do it based on a proactive investigation where red flags have been raised about maybe a parent calling or a community member calling or emailing them. Or they can also do random inquiries into a district just to check things out. And if they do some things like this, these investigations or random inquiries, they can pool multiple groups together and get departments together to be interviewed to understand how well that teachers and staffers and administrators are meeting the needs of the English language learners. They can do a complete data review for the entire district, not just the ESOL program, but any other program that receives federal funding. And it could turn into a regular investigation if the findings are not positive. So that's why it's very important for us, not just out of our love for our students, but if we want our love for our jobs, to make sure that we're doing our jobs, because it is indeed our job to educate children, no matter what language origin they come from. Parents have rights in terms of their students' education. Parent notification applies to English language identification, that's initial screening and testing, to instruction of English language learners, to assessment and accountability. Federal regulations require districts to communicate with parents in an understandable and uniform format, and to the extent practicable in a language the parent can understand. We need to go out of our way to make sure that our families are understanding every key element of what we're communicating to any other family, because they have the rights just like anyone else does. Their language background should not penalize them and not give them access to our school district and to the programs involved. And students also have rights, of course. According to a court case, Lau v. Nichols, the case argued that the local school district was not providing an adequate education to its English learners because the ELs could not sufficiently comprehend English. The Supreme Court ruled in this case that the school district needed to provide and take active steps to give the ELs the instructional program that will give them equal access to an education. And this is the court decision that brings that statement back to mind. And equal education is not always an identical education. Identical is not equal. And don't feel like you need to read this whole slide, but it's just to give you an idea that we also have state expectations based on the law of South Carolina about things that we need to do to provide training for parents and staffers and students. This one specifically talks about professional development, which indeed is what you're doing right now. We're trying to design professional development that's sustaining and long-lasting that will help you guys to learn more and more about how to work with ELL students as you go through your years of teaching experience. Part 2 for this final module is some nuts and bolts about some issues around ELL learners. So, if you want to find out how to determine the level of an English language learner, whether it's the composite level or their overall level, for example, an advanced student, or if you want to learn about the different proficiency levels they exhibit in each of the 4 domains, speaking, reading, writing, and listening, you can go to several places. There's score reports for the ELDA assessment, which is a former test we used to give, or for the Access assessment, which is our newer test. We also have a WAPT, or WAPT screener, which we'll give to new students enrolling, which also divides things up into those 4 domains. They're a great place to find information, and you can find the ELDA and Access scores on Enrich. To find the WAPT scores, you need to talk to your ESOL teacher. If you look at an ELDA score report, which again can be found on Enrich, you'll see that the student's information will be found at the top, the score ranges are provided next in the box, and then the student's level at each of the different domains is listed with a score and an overall proficiency level. And there's also a little bit of information at each section to tell you more about what the student can or can't do. The Access score reports are a bit more detailed and actually a bit more helpful than the ELLs score reports were, and this is a small section of that chart. And here again you'll see the language domains down the first column, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, as well as a couple other components. There'll be a scaled score, a confidence band, and also the overall proficiency level for each category, and then the composite score. And here you can spend some time checking over this if you'd like, so pause the recording to see more about the Access scores, which can really help you understand the students and where they are at each domain. There's a lot of resources also available to you electronically and on paper. Let's look at a few electronic ones first. We've already talked about the WIDA website at wida.us, but it's a great place, especially that download library, to find just a ton of resources to really help you working with your student. Once you go into the library, again, the guiding principles are there, the can-do descriptors by grade levels are there, the 2012 and the 2007 standards are all found here, and lots of good ideas for lesson plans. You also notice there's things about the Access test and other tests, some research, lots of things about the standards, and a few other things that you can check out on the WIDA site if you'd like. Talk to your ESL teacher if you need some help navigating the site. If you want to go and find some lesson plans, there's actually a shared space on the WIDA.us site where you can type in your lesson's title, topic, or keyword, and you can select your language standard or your domain or your grade level and find a lot of great ideas that people from all around the nation in any of the 35 states have already posted that are really great ways that have already incorporated all the aspects of a proper standard framework and also of the MPIs. There'll be lots of great examples there for you to look at. And if you just want to search something, there's obviously the search box at the top where you can find tons of key information. If you do search for something, for example, academic language, you'll find a lot of results from all across the spectrum, things that WIDA has put out themselves or things that have been shared by members and member states. And of course, there's an app for that. We just put together an app which you can find on the iTunes store for $3.99. It's really a great and easy way to look through all the standards that are displayed in any of the books that WIDA's ever put out from the 07 and 2012. You can search by subject, by grade, and by domain quite easily, and there's lots of extra resources that you might find really helpful, just including the can-do descriptors, the ideas about things about features of language and academic language and things like that. And I found it much easier to navigate than the bulky books when looking for creating MPIs. The folks over at ESOL in the state of South Carolina also put out some pretty good resources that can be found on Edmodo. If you've never signed up for Edmodo, you can do that and then look for the page that I'll show you next. What you want to do when you get into Edmodo is to search for the group name called WIDA Resources. You might need an access code to join, and once you do, you'll be able to see lots of posts from group members all around the state who have added information and added attachments and documents or asked or answered questions that might be really helpful for you in your understanding of WIDA as you continue to learn more about how to help your ELL. There's also a lot of district online resources you could find. We have a teaching content for English language learners website. You can find the link listed here. It also has an accompanying 30-hour professional development opportunity to earn you more CEUs and recertification credits if you'd like to do that after this set of modules. It's a great website divided up into the different content areas of things that might be helpful for you as you're looking to help your students. There's also a Richland 2 ESL teacher website that includes lots of stuff dealing with WIDA specifics and lots of things from elementary, middle, and high school that you could find helpful. If you're thinking about resources from R2 personnel, there's tons of ideas to get you started. You can talk to the teacher next door to you, because oftentimes that's the person who's the safest person for you to talk to. Or get out there and be a little braver and talk to your school's ESL teacher. Ask them some questions about specific students or concerns you have. We also have several ESL instructional coaches or lead teachers who can help you with connections to other electronic, print, and personnel resources. There's also lots of opportunities in the district for professional development, reading books together, doing modules like this, and hearing professional development from these instructional coaches and lead teachers. And it's obviously a very collaborative setting because we're all learning as we go through this. And the district representatives over the ESL program are also very helpful. People in the district office are here to help you to do the best you can by our students and their families. So finally, part 3, where we've come from and where we want to go from here. Alright, so let's go back and look through really briefly the 7 modules we've gone through since we began this course. In our first module, we did a basic overview of WIDA. We learned about the philosophy and the guiding principles. We talked about the can-do descriptors for student success. In the second module, we talked about language acquisition, how students learn a language, and then how they develop the academic language they need for the classroom. Third module was about differentiation, scaffolding, and support. We learned a lot of ways to help students to succeed in our classes. In the fourth module, we talked about understanding the ESL students socially and academically using the ELL profiles. And then in Unit 5, we talked about the performance definitions and the functions of academic language. It was a lot of challenging stuff, but we talked about many details that help to make up these 2 components. Module 6 was the WIDA Standards Framework, where we looked at the overall matrix and looked at the MPIs that make up the strands found inside the matrices. And finally, in this last module, we talked about compliance issues, federal with the OCR, and state level. I hope you feel like you've gained a lot of new knowledge and insights into working with English language learners. And so from here, we want you to go out and make an impact. Each day a little bit more, each year a little bit more, and yes, you can.